Tonight, new arrest warrants confirm what Aiken County investigators had only hinted at behind a podium. Both of Javeayah Harris's parents confessed. Not to panic, not to a few minutes of not knowing where their daughter was, to something that happened weeks before that phone was ever picked up. If you watched our last video on this case, you already heard that phone call in full, all 5 minutes of it. If you haven't seen it yet, the link is pinned in the comments and in the description. Go watch that one first, then come back to this. What you didn't have yet, even if you did watch it, is the document that changes what that call actually means. Here's what everyone covering this case is asking. How does a parent make that call, sounding exactly like that, if she already knew what the warrant now says she knew? That's the question every comment section is stuck on, ours included. It's also, according to what's actually written in that warrant, the wrong one. Because the real story isn't the 5 minutes you already heard. It's the roughly 4 weeks investigators say came before it. The gap between an injury Javeayah suffered and a mother describing pink Minnie Mouse pajamas to a dispatcher as if that evening was happening in real time. So the question we're actually answering tonight isn't how she made that call. It's what was happening inside that house on Hillsborough Street during everything the warrant says came before it. And why, once you know that timeline, a call you've already heard sounds like something else entirely the second time. We're going to walk through the warrant exactly as it was filed. We'll reference the call only where it's reframed by something new. No need to sit through all 5 minutes again. And we're going to show you why the search for Javeayah isn't even happening in the county where she lived. Right now, both parents are sitting in the Aiken County Detention Center, denied bond, with a court date that isn't until September. Before we get to where this stands today, we need to start with what's actually on paper, because until this week, nobody outside law enforcement had seen it.
Baby.
The arrest warrants for Johmarea Harris and Michilae were released Monday by the Aiken County Sheriff's Office. Herring, Javeayah's mother, is named as the person whose physical abuse caused the injury her daughter suffered. Harris, her father, is charged separately, and the distinction matters. The warrant doesn't accuse him of causing the harm himself. It accuses him of knowing about that injury and failing to get Javeayah medical care. The warrants describe the circumstances surrounding Javeayah's death using a specific legal phrase, extreme indifference to human life. That language isn't describing one violent moment. It's describing a sustained failure to act once harm had already occurred. Herring faces one more charge that's easy to skim past but shouldn't be: filing a false police report. Not about a stranger, about her own daughter's disappearance. That charge exists because, according to the warrant, the account she gave 911 wasn't just incomplete. It was false, filed after investigators say she already knew what had happened to Javeayah. Here's the detail that separates this case from almost every missing child case this channel has covered. None of this came from months of forensic buildup, cell tower records, or witness statements assembled after the fact. According to the warrants, both parents told investigators what happened, separately, in their own words. That is a very different case than the one South Carolina was watching a week ago, when the open question was still whether a missing child's story added up. Now, according to the documents filed in court, the two people who knew the truth from the beginning are the same two people who confirmed it wasn't true. Now here's where the official record stops answering the question and starts complicating it. The warrant states that Herring admitted to disposing of Javeayah's body at a location other than the family's home on Hillsborough Street, not the yard, not the chicken coop she'd later described to a 911 dispatcher, somewhere else entirely. That single line is why search crews right now aren't working the property where Javeayah lived. They're 2 hours north, in Fairfield County, working the waters near a place called Debutary Creek. What's on paper only tells us the body isn't where the search first began, and that somewhere else is where investigators are now looking. We'll get to that location, and why it isn't random. First, the call that started this entire case, and where it stops matching what the warrant now says. You've already heard the call in full if you watched our last video. So instead of playing all 5 minutes again, we're going back to 4 specific moments in it. The same 4 moments, except this time you know what the warrant says. And once you know that, they don't sound the same. The first moment is the opening line. Herring gives the address, 39 Hillsborough Street, and tells the dispatcher Javeayah had been playing outside while she cooked dinner, that she'd only been inside 20 or 30 minutes. On its own, that's a timeline. Next to the warrant, it's something else. Investigators say Javeayah had already been dead for roughly a month by the night this call was made. So that 20 to 30-minute window Herring gives the dispatcher isn't describing the last time she actually saw her daughter alive. According to what's now on paper, it can't be. The second moment is the level of detail. Herring describes exactly what Javeayah was wearing: pink Minnie Mouse pajamas, pink beads in her braids. She mentions the coop where Javeayah likes to play, the place she checks first. Listen to that moment again, knowing the timeline, and it stops sounding like a mother describing what her daughter had on that evening. It sounds like a routine and an outfit from weeks earlier, retold as if it were happening in real time. The third moment is when the dispatcher asks about Javeayah's health. Herring says they'd been told she might be autistic, but that it was never formally diagnosed, and adds that Javeayah is smart, that she can carry a full conversation. That line builds a picture of a living, present child in the listener's mind, which is exactly what makes the timeline so difficult to reconcile with what's being said. The fourth moment is near the end, easiest to miss on a first listen. The dispatcher asks for a callback number. Herring says her phone isn't active for calls, that there's no number where anyone can reach her back. At the time, that reads as an inconvenience. Next to a warrant describing weeks of silence before this call was ever made, it reads differently. Here's what makes revisiting this call worthwhile, even if you've already heard it once. The first time, most viewers were listening for a lie, a hesitation, a contradiction, something that gives it away. That's not what's in this recording. Every detail is specific. Every reaction sounds appropriate. That's exactly why Sheriff Marty Sawyer said announcing the shift from missing child to homicide was the hardest moment of his 36-year career in law enforcement. He told the community directly that by the time this call was placed, it was already too late to save Javeayah. So the call that launched a search across Aiken County, that had volunteers checking sheds and crawl spaces for days, wasn't describing a child who'd wandered off that evening. According to what investigators now allege, it was describing an evening that had already happened weeks earlier, delivered with enough specific, sensory detail that nobody listening had reason to question it. That's the hardest part of this case to sit with. Not that a lie was told. Lies get told in missing persons cases more often than people think. It's that this particular account held up under real scrutiny, for days, while search resources were spent based on details that, according to the warrant, may not have described that night at all, which raises the only question the evidence itself hasn't answered. If this call wasn't describing the day Javeayah went missing, what was actually happening in that house during the weeks before it? And why did it take investigators as long as it did to get to the two people who could tell them? A quick note before this section. Everything here is either directly from the warrant, from Sheriff Sawyer's own public statements, or from court records tied to this family. Nothing here is a theory we're introducing. The warrant doesn't give a single date for the injury that caused Javeayah's death. What it establishes is a window, and Sawyer's public statement gives that window its shape. Somewhere in the roughly 4 weeks before June 30th, Javeayah suffered an injury, and neither parent sought medical attention for her afterward. That gap is the actual center of this case, not the call. The call is 5 minutes. The gap is a month. A single violent moment is one kind of allegation. Weeks of knowing a child is hurt, and choosing, repeatedly, not to act, is a heavier one. And it's the pattern the warrant's language was written to describe. The Augusta Press, which has followed this case closely since the arrests, reported that authorities have not disclosed what specific evidence, records, or interviews led investigators to that 1-month timeline. That's worth sitting with. We have the conclusion. We don't yet have all of what built it. What we do know is what happened once that conclusion was reached. The investigation expanded beyond Aiken County into Fairfield County, to the waters near Debutary Creek. Authorities have said only that this became an area of interest. They haven't detailed why, publicly, at least not yet. But there's a connection here that doesn't require speculation, because it's already in court records. Both Herring and Harris lived in Union County, on Harris Street, between 2024 and 2025, and both were separately named in eviction cases during that time. Union County borders the search area in Fairfield County. This isn't a random stretch of water 2 hours from where this family currently lives. It's near where they came from. That lines up with the warrant's admission that Javeayah's remains were disposed of somewhere other than the home on Hillsborough Street. A search built on a specific area with a documented family connection is consistent with a search built on information from people who knew where to look, not a search built on guesswork. That connection hasn't been confirmed publicly by investigators as the reason for the search location. That has to be said plainly. But it's the version of events that accounts for everything currently on the record. There's one more piece that hasn't been fully explained, and it's the piece that determines how this case actually gets resolved. A confession explains what happened. It doesn't explain, at least not in anything made public, exactly how investigators got two separate people to tell them the same thing, or what happened in the room before either of them did. That's the part of this case still sitting just out of view. And it's the part that changes everything else once it comes into focus. Here's the answer, and it's simpler than most people expect. There is no forensic breakthrough behind this case. No cell tower data that cracked the timeline. No DNA result made public that forced a confession. According to the arrest warrants themselves, this case moved from missing child to double homicide charge because both parents told investigators what happened. That's the whole mechanism. To be fully honest, authorities have not released the details of how those confessions were obtained, what was said in that room, or what led each parent to talk. That part isn't public, and we're not filling in blanks with something that sounds satisfying but isn't confirmed. What is confirmed is the outcome. Two people who knew exactly what happened to Javeayah are the same two people who told investigators the truth, weeks after choosing not to. That single fact is the turn in this entire case, because of what it means for everything you've already heard. Investigators didn't need to catch Herring in a lie on that recording. They didn't need forensic contradiction to unravel her story. The call could have held up indefinitely, word for word, and it still wouldn't have mattered once both parents chose to tell the truth. That changes how you should think about the search, too. The volunteers combing yards and sheds across Aiken County weren't working toward a break in physical evidence. The break, when it came from the two people at the center of the story, not from anything the search itself uncovered. It also explains the pace of this case. Investigations built on physical evidence alone often take months to produce charges. This one moved from a missing persons report to 2 homicide charges and a false reporting charge in roughly a week. Because once both parents spoke, prosecutors had what they needed without waiting on a slower evidentiary process. And it tells you where this case goes next. Once defense attorneys are formally involved, neither parent had one present at their bond hearing. The fight will almost certainly center on those statements themselves, how they were taken, whether both parents were properly informed of their rights, whether anything said was misrepresented in how it was summarized on the warrant. None of that has been tested by a judge yet. Both parents remain legally presumed innocent until it is. But as of tonight, in the 2 documents that actually exist and are public, this case isn't built on a theory. It's built on Javeayah Harris and Michilae Herring's own words, given separately, and consistent enough with each other to support identical charges against both of them. Before we get to where this case stands right now, it's worth stepping back from the documents for a moment. On Sunday, before most of these warrant details were public, Aiken gathered for a vigil for Javeayah. People who never met her showed up anyway. Some left stuffed animals and candles outside the home on Hillsborough Street. For a lot of this community, that vigil happened while they still believed they were mourning a missing child, one day before the warrant would reveal otherwise. That kind of response has followed this case from the beginning. Hundreds of volunteers spent days searching yards, sheds, and wooded areas across Aiken County before any arrests were made. Now that the case has shifted to a homicide investigation, that presence hasn't disappeared. It's aimed at something different now. Less about finding Javeayah alive, more about making sure she isn't reduced to a name on a court document. Here's where things actually stand as of this recording. Javeayah has not been found. Search crews are still working the water near Debutary Creek, with SLED and the Department of Natural Resources continuing by boat. Officials have not said publicly whether anything has been recovered. Both parents appeared separately before Magistrate Judge Ronald Thornton and were denied bond. Neither had an attorney present at their hearing. Under South Carolina law, a magistrate doesn't have authority to grant bond on a charge this severe. So that decision now sits with a circuit court judge, and won't be revisited before the next scheduled court date, September 18th. Until then, both Harris and Herring remain in custody at the Aiken County Detention Center. One more detail from that hearing worth noting. Herring gave birth to a newborn shortly after this investigation began. That child has since been placed in the custody of a family member, with South Carolina's Department of Social Services involved. A standard step whenever a parent facing charges this serious has another child in their care. The Aiken County Sheriff's Office has said additional charges remain possible, depending on what the ongoing search turns up. Until Javeayah is found, and until a court actually tests what's currently only written in a warrant, this case stays open. If you have any information related to this case, the search near Debutary Creek, this family's time in Union County, or anything else that might help, contact the Aiken County Sheriff's Office directly, or reach out to SLED's tip line. That's where this case stands tonight. 2 parents in custody without bond. A search still active 2 hours from where Javeayah lived. A confession on paper, and a courtroom that won't hear any of it until September. This case has moved faster than almost anything we've covered on this channel. From a missing persons report to 2 homicide charges in about a week. That pace alone tells you there's more coming, not less. We'll be back with an update the moment something changes. If you haven't seen our first video on this case, the one with the full 911 call, it's linked in the pinned comment and in the description. And before you go, tell us in the comments. After everything in this warrant, the timeline, the confession, the search now happening 2 counties away, what's the one detail that changed how you see this case? For us, it's that the truth never came from an investigation. It came from the 2 people who caused it.